Welcome to Vintage Hollywood Archive. Loss of a loved one, you never really recover from it. You feel their absence by your side as you rush to turn to them, excited about how your day has been. Your heart beats fine and blood pumps through your body, but in that same body, there would be a void that the blood never gets to. It gets easier, people would say. What a lie. It never gets easier for each draw of air you take. There is this knot in your chest. Gene Wilder felt that knot, but used it to improve the lives of many. Why Gilda Radner and Gene Wilder had the most tragic love story. Make sure to watch the video until the end, and if you are new here, don't forget to join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Vintage Hollywood Archive channel. Loss can never really be defined. It remains with us, a reminder of what once was. Yet, we have to live. But how do we live when those we live for are no more? Each time you think about how things could have been different, their death could have been avoidable. Each time you become like Gene Wilder when his wife and soulmate, comedic genius Gilda Radner, died as a result of ovarian cancer. Their bond wasn't a mundane one. It was the perfect intertwining of souls. A bond so powerful that Gilda would describe the feeling of being in love with Gene. My life went from black and white to technicolor. Imagine losing someone who holds this much significance to your life. For Gene, just Gilda's spoken words were not all he remembered. He had to live with her written words, her notes to herself, trying to find comfort for herself. After her funeral, the day after, Gene was going over Gilda's things. He relished the familiar clutter of her desk drawer, and he saw her notepad. He took the notepad, and he read the content. It was a drawing of Gilda's body with a text, "How do you feel?" She would reply herself, describing her fears and discomfort. In that notepad, she also asked herself what would make her feel better and unafraid. She wrote, "If someone could for sure tell me that everything would be okay." Gene Wilder would assure her she would be fine, but he had been informed to get ready for the worst. So, in Gene's eyes, Radner died twice. He started feeling his loss right from when his beloved was alive, and he couldn't tell her she would soon die. How could he? She felt some of the most excruciating pain a person could ever feel. She went through bouts of chemotherapy that weakened her and made her hair fall off. Although Gene remained a rock during these periods and gave her all the encouragement she needed, he found the little tufts of hair on her head and let her know. This gave the ailing Radner small comfort, but she wasn't also completely dependent on him to get her needed dose of happiness. She was also capable of making herself happy, being a comedic genius herself. She would reenact her iconic Saturday night character, Roseanne Donna, yelling at cancer in her body, saying, "Hey, what are you trying to do in here? Make me sick?" After the incredibly draining chemotherapy, which she did once in 3 weeks till her death, she would play a recording of each session and jump around in incredible glee, which is rare with someone dying. While the humor blunted the edge of the coming death, it didn't make the journey less painful for the two parties. Wilder witnessed Gilda's hysterics when it was time for chemo. She would flat out reject going to chemo with streams of tears falling from her eyes. She had to listen to experts tell her she was lucky and chemo could be a cure. Her aversion to chemo would progressively increase, so Gilda fought the sedation when she was going for a scan and had to be sedated. Get me out, she said, not minding the soothing voice of professionals trying to downplay her fears of not waking up afterwards. They tried to tell her it was just routine and a quick process, but Gilda knew. They successfully sedated her, but she would remain unconscious for 3 days, and Gene sat by her bedside all through the time until a doctor instructed him to go home for a bit. He returned to the hospital to his wife, who met her alive and properly cared for. However, her breathing had become irregular, with pauses in her breaths. Gene planted a kiss on her lips, and 2 hours after, while Gene wasn't in the ward, Radner stopped breathing. Her life was snuffed out after years of ill health. her death stayed with Wilder, for he discovered after that Gilda didn't have to die. He was so sure of this as Dr. Ezra Greenspan, one of Gilda's doctors, told him if she had been tested for ovarian cancer earlier, she could be alive today. Different doctors had a field day misdiagnosing the delightful comedian when she first reported her inability to see properly and tiredness to sleepiness to her doctor in LA in January 1986. He diagnosed her with Epstein-Barr virus and chronic fatigue. Still, the symptoms persisted, with new ones joining, such as bloats, tummy pain, crippling pain in her thighs, and more. Despite these symptoms, tests conducted didn't show anything harmful, and experts dismissed Gilda's fears and statement, asking if it wasn't cancer. However, while they dismissed her fears of cancer, they couldn't dismiss the then undetected cancer cells running wild in her. It was in October that a tumor was found in Jean, and it had gotten big. The doctors swung into action, but the cancer had peaked and was at its highest level. There was little that they could do, but they tried what they could. Nonetheless, the belief that we will carry till the dusk of our lives will always be that Gilda could have lived a full life if the cancer had been discovered earlier. Gilda and Wilder were married in 1984 in the most romantic of settings and honeymooned in the same manner. Their relationship was written in the stars, as many people could see. Payne Kantz, Radner's friend, said the two shared a chemistry that was palpable. She also said that the two caused visible sparks in the air when they interacted. They hadn't been together yet, but there was no chance that they weren't going to be, Payne Kantz concluded. However, as apparent as an eventual relationship would come to be as Payne predicted, even Payne didn't predict the pain that would beset the awe-inspiring couple and the loss that would come of it. Gilda and Wilder had only a 5-year marriage, with only 2 of those years spent in great health. Life dealt them a hand they couldn't play. All through the times that Radner was sick, Wilder never thought she could die for once. He was certain that she would die before him, and if asked if he could lay down his life in exchange for Gilda surviving, Wilder would take the option. Shortly after it had been discovered that if there hadn't been any misdiagnosis of Gilda's illness and doctors asking about Gilda's history, she could have lived. Gilda's fear of cancer came from the fact that her father died from cancer. However, what Gilda didn't know was that her grandmother, cousin, and aunt had ovarian cancer. Even so, Gilda's fear of her having cancer should provide enough basis for a clinical investigation. Writing Gilda's fear off by saying she was a high-strung, emotional, nervous girl looks a bit arrogant. They even believed her constant breaking down, one of which was when Jean took her to France and she began to have problems after eating at Jean's favorite bistro, which might be depression-related. So they put her on antidepressants, which they guaranteed would help with her body pain. This would continue until her cancer was discovered. But we suppose doctors can't be perfect, and there wasn't much ovarian cancer awareness at the time. Since he couldn't give his life for hers, he did the next best thing: bring awareness to ovarian cancer. It all began with him researching and talking to several doctors. He was inspired by Gilda's voice in his eyes, yelling, "It's too late for me. Don't let it happen to anyone else." So in 1991, he would eventually testify before Congress, giving details about Gilda's misdiagnosis. He formed Gilda's Club, a center for cancer patients based in New York, and would later merge with the wellness community. The merger would bring about the nation's largest cancer support network. The death of his wife inspired his legacy, which would help prevent more needless deaths. For a man to be this driven due to the love he felt for his wife, you can only imagine the sweetness the two felt in the relationship. It was indeed a relationship written in the stars, right from the moment the two met on the set of Hanky Panky on August 13, 1981. Wilder spotted Gilda standing on the dock, the sun setting behind her. It was as if life was illuminating his next partner for him. Jean had divorced twice before. The comedic genius met Gilda, who was not only funny but also mischievous. After the greeting, Gilda would accuse Jean of the most atrocious thing ever. She said Jean rubbed his crotch on her when he offered to bring her tea and coffee. Jean quickly rejected this. "You are nuts," he said. she would quickly reply, "No, they were your nuts." At that time, Gilda knew that she would be seeing those nuts later, for she was smitten with Gene. Gene was funny and athletic and handsome, and he smelled good. I was bitten with love. She was hooked by the dashing actor. Soon, the two would start filming, and they had gotten quite close. On the night filming was to begin, Gilda began to cry, and when Gene asked, she said it was because she knew she'll marry Gene. The statement came as a shocker, as Gilda was married at the time. Not that the idea of being in a relationship with Gilda wasn't enticing to Gene. However, Gene was determined to maintain some decorum, and when Gilda made a bold move on him, he declined, citing her marriage. For Gilda, she wasn't enjoying her marriage to her husband, G.E. Smith, and he wasn't even invested in the marriage. Never truly at home with the husband, and always on the move. Still, she accepted what Gene said and gave her a code to use if she wanted to reach her. Gene used the code as he felt his heart wrenched being away from her. So, he kept in touch with Radner. Soon, Radner and her husband would divorce, and she would move in with Gene. The two had a swell time together, but the age gap caused a bit of a divide between them. Wilder had seen more life and experienced maturity from a woman in a relationship. He felt he hadn't seen it, delaying his proposal to Radner. Wilder thought Gilda was a baby as she was clingy, and he wasn't confident if she would be able to do without him. However, he quickly realized his folly when they were supposed to travel, and she had to stay back to take care of her sick dog. Gene was convinced, and he ended up proposing to her. They had the most romantic wedding and honeymoon. Unlike her previous wedding, she was dedicated to this one. She learned tennis and basketball, which were Gene's sporting interests. Also, she stopped smoking and even reduced some of her boisterousness to take on the demeanor of her shy husband. The pair tried to have kids, but they wouldn't be successful as the 2 times Gilda was pregnant, she had miscarried, with one being on the set of Haunted Honeymoon, another film they acted together in. The last film that had both of them in it was Red Woman. They tried IVF, and it wasn't successful. If only they knew the real reason behind their inability to get pregnant. The two were destined lovers who lived their lives before merging into one. The delightful actress got her inspiration to act from her dad, who loved show business and would always encourage her doctor to perform. He was supportive of her performances, always being the first person that rises in applause for her when she performed. He took her to the cinema a lot, but sadly, he died due to brain cancer. Perhaps her preference for acting came from her trying to do what her father enjoyed when he was alive. Growing up, she was overweight, which triggered a series of eating disorders that would see her weight fluctuate. She went to college to study theater and improvisation, but dropped out in 1969 and began to chase her dream. She got a role in 1972 with Godspell, and it marked her stage debut. She then joined the cast of SNL and brought to life characters such as Emily Latella, an older adult with hearing problems. Also, she brought Lisa Loopner, a classic nerd, and Baba Wawa with her exaggerated speech impediment. She didn't forget. There's also Roseanne Donna, the loud New York news anchor. Gene also had an ailing parent, which motivated him to be a comedic person. His mother had a heart problem, and he was sternly warned by the doctors to always make her laugh and not cause trouble. He didn't. Gene was born Jerome Silberman in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on June 11, 1933, to a Russian father and American mother. He polished his comedic skills with his mom as his audience before making the decision to make it a career, and Gene went to college and studied communication and theater arts. He also studied theater and fencing at Bristol's Bristol Old Vic Theater School. No wonder he was great at acting. He didn't begin acting immediately as he served in the U.S. Army as a medic. He did some odd jobs before getting acting jobs, which required him to change his name. He acted on and off Broadway shows before eventually getting a minor role in Bonnie and Clyde. Eventually, he got a major role from the friendship he made when acting on stage. He played the supporting actor in the film The Producers, a failure at the box office, but Gene still shone brightly that he got an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. He would go on to play Willy Wonka in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which earned him a Golden Globe nomination for Best Actor. Soon, his personal success began to match his commercial success, and it began with everything you always wanted to know about sex, but were afraid to ask. He also acted in the 1974 comedy Blazing Saddles. He co-wrote and acted in Young Frankenstein, which further increased his legend. He would marry and divorce twice, eventually feeling complete when he married Gilda. However, their love story was short, but it fulfilled them. While it's not a Romeo and Juliet story, the two share a tale of near equal tragic proportions. Gilda had to endure the worst pain, and her lover, Gene Wilder, the same. But they weren't the only couple in Hollywood with an extremely tragic story behind. Watch this video about Vivien Leigh and her tragic love life.